was far below. Over 10 years, with the advent of public-private partnerships and greater fillip to investment, you see the remarkable improvement in India's infrastructure, both in respect of roads, ports, air transport, so much so that its overall index increased by about 30% from 2010, and the only other country that overtook India in infrastructure was Vietnam. Vietnam, between 2010 and 11, had a massive spurt in infrastructure, essentially because of public-private partnerships. So what exactly is public-private partnership? I have sourced a legal definition of these private-public partnerships through Government of India. There are 5 or 6 ingredients in public-private partnership. One, it's a partnership between the state, government, and the private sector. Second, the aim of the partnership is to deliver public service or public goods. Third, there is a risk allocation between the government and the private sector. And the fourth is that in return for putting their money and for accepting the risk, the private sector get a certain return based on performance and based on standards. That really is the crux of what public-private partnerships are. And we see this today in evidence in all the airports in Bangalore. Although Bangalore was the first airport, Mumbai, Delhi, Hyderabad are all examples of public-private partnership in the airport sector. We see it in ports, and above all, we see it in the road sector, where all the fantastic expansion in road projects in India across north, south, west, and east is through these public-private partnerships. I have a very good video that I'll show at the end because, it's time-consuming. It's about 7 to 8 minutes. But I want to talk about what actually happened and give you a flavor of what these public-private partnerships are and how they work in the case of the Bangalore International Airport. Before we started this project, Bangalore Airport was really overcrowded. It had reached its capacity of 3 million. And I'm sure you must have used the old airport. It was located in the HAL, which is a defense area. And so there was no way in which that airport could be expanded. So the government of that day decided that they needed a new airport. And this airport was located in the north of Bangalore. The main reason why we located in the north was because of availability of government land. 1,500 acres of government land was available in what is now the Bangalore International Airport. And along with that, 3,500 acres of land was acquired under the Land Acquisition Act, for which we paid 5 lakhs an acre, then, 20 years ago. And today, the value of that land is about 15 crores an acre, consequent to the airport coming through. And so, this airport was therefore located in the north of Bangalore. I will skip the video because this video, unless you want me to show it now.
If you want to show a short one.
Yeah, it's... Hanji. Have a look at this video because it's very interesting. This was the video which the consortium which was selected to build the airport, Siemens, presented to the selection committee prior to the airport coming through. And if you've been in the Bangalore International Airport, you can assess what is the degree of fit between whatever their imagination was about what the airport is going to be and what the actual airport is. If the video can be played. The video was made by Siemens, who gave it to the selection committee, led by a gentleman called Nasser Munji, who was managing director of IDFC. I'll explain that selection process if we can get the video, otherwise. Right.
Full kar do.
This was their sales pitch for the new airport.
The consortium, comprising of private and public entrepreneurs, has joined together to build and operate the new international airport at Bangalore. Located along the Bangalore-Hyderabad National Highway number 7, the Bangalore International Airport is a class of its own. This Garden City Airport shall be an outstanding construction, a safe, functional and an architectural marvel reflecting the regional characteristics. The sheltered passenger drop-off is designed to accommodate a large number of travelers and well-wishers with spaciously roofed concrete shelves supported by integrated columns, creating a sense of being inside. Large spans of inviting glass facades evoke the first glimpses of the interiors. The precast concrete wall panels with glass block inserts add glamour to this high-tech building. Sprawling linear check-in counters, attributes to the guarantee of short check-in times with elegantly crafted finishes welcoming the passengers. Warm materials and natural stone finish show articulated craftsmanship with ravishing honed grey granite floors and traditional mandala inlays. The splendid flamed finished red imperial granite clad columns add a tranquil atmosphere to the interiors. Checked-in passengers proceed to the first floor through elegantly designed escalators.
So,
I should quickly say that, the reality is much better than
right.
this video. It's
And-
absolutely amazing.
Amazing. And the difference is that, that the floral patterns, mandala, is not there in the regular airport because the government of India took exception to that. They said that, those kind of motifs are no longer valid when it was approved by them. So here is something that I wanted to share with you. When we talk of public-private partnerships, there are 4 models of this partnership. And these models really distribute ownership and risk. So on the x-axis, we have ownership, and on the y-axis, we have risk. The easiest thing that the governments usually do is a service contract, give it to somebody else to run it as a service. Then there are these management contracts and lease contracts, and the most important of them is the concession agreement, the concession contract, where, the ownership vests with the private sector for a specified period, and the government takes a backseat role in terms of managing the asset. And that's exactly what's happened in Bangalore and in all the other public-private partnerships. Because how the ownership is distributed in these projects is that majority equity is handled by the private sector. So in Bangalore, as also in Bombay and in Delhi, 74% of the equity is with the private entity. GMR in Delhi, Mial in Mumbai, and so on, whereas it was Siemens and L&T and Zurich Airport in Bangalore, who were the successful bidder, and 26% equity with the state. This was a major change from the old days, where the entire airports were owned by the government, and they ran under the Aerodrome Act 1943. So this concession contract was devised for the first time in Bangalore and then extended to the other airports. So this airport in Bangalore is the first greenfield airport project completed in 2008. It is with a consortium led by Siemens worldwide, L&T, and Zurich Airport, and they had 74% equity. And both the government of Karnataka and government of India had 13% equity each. This pattern, as I said, was replicated across other projects. And here, at the outset, the government played a very major role in making the airport happen in terms of procuring the land, in terms of putting the bid forward, selecting a joint venture partner, going through the process of a concession agreement with the government of India, transferring ownership from the public domain to the private domain, at the same time retaining sovereignty functions with the government, namely security, air traffic control, all those things that are integral to the safe functioning of the airport remain immigration and passport control. All those in India remain with the government. I don't know what it is in other countries, but in India they remain with the government. And most important, when you look at procurement issues in the public domain, how transparent the selection process is. There are any number of cases that go before the courts which say that there is some sweetheart deal going on here and somebody close to XYZ has got the project. I mean, we all heard that, right? But this, how do you make this entire selection transparent? And then there are certain lessons learned, which I will be passing on to you. So I won't go into the background. I've explained the background. This is very important in the context of any public-private project partnership, is this bid process and partner selection. So this was an international bid that was floated, and the government created a company called BIAL, Bangalore International Airport Limited, and the Chief Minister appointed me as Managing Director. In order to bring about credibility with the private sector, they decided that the chairman of the company will be a very noted person from the private domain, and N.R. Narayan Murthy, who was chairman of Infosys, was appointed as chairman. I was the MD, the first MD. There was a board, and this was tasked with the idea of getting this project going. And I did this in addition to my other responsibilities in the government. And the successful bidder, okay, got 74% equity. It was one of the conditions of bid that there has to be a consortium, namely that there must be an airport operator and there must be a civil construction company. And that civil construction company must be an Indian company. Those were the conditions of the bid. And this bid, therefore, involved, I'm sure all of us know these terms, RFQ, request for qualification. Everybody could not bid, only a qualified consortium could bid. And finally, we had 4 of them who were reduced to 2, Siemens and Hochtief Airport. Hochtief Airport operates the Berlin Airport in Germany. And so this video that you saw was presented by Siemens to the selection committee. So I explained that the bid process has to be transparent. And so therefore we organized a very rigorous evaluation of this entire bid. We called both the successful bidders, made them present it to this committee. This committee was led by Nasser Munji, who was the chairman, managing director of IDFC. It consisted of American experts, somebody from the government of India, etc. And they sat in Bangalore for 15 days at a stretch, and then they selected one bidder. The basis for selection is very important. They selected the bidder on the basis of experience, on the basis of what kind of state support that consortium has asked from the government. So obviously, the lesser the state support, the higher the chances of selection. And also, what is the concept of their airport? So what you saw was the Siemens concept that was scored over Hochtief. And having done that, the selection committee recommended that Siemens should be the successful consortium. Their task ended with that. But thereafter, what we had to do was to take it to the government for approval in a cabinet meeting. And after their approval, there were a lot of comments in the cabinet. One of the comments was, you are selling away the family silver. Because why should you have a private guy come and start the airport? We will do it ourselves, etc. Comments like that. The other was that, this was close after 9/11. And so there were many times when the partner selected tried to back out, saying that, conditions are not good in developing countries, and therefore we don't know how long this government will last. What if the government changes and tomorrow the successor government says, we don't want to take up this project? All those things have now been ironed out because foreign investors don't say that today, but 20 years ago these were rife, and therefore we had to overcome all that. And we also did one interesting thing I'd like to tell you. The unsuccessful bidder who reached the finals was compensated 5 crores. Right. Because it took a lot of effort, right, to put the whole thing through, to make the survey, to do the video, to give a technical sizing. I mean, I'm simplifying all this, but you can imagine what kind of background work had to be done. So we, on our own accord, paid 5 crores to whoever lost, the losing finalist. I just want to also tell you that this is, I won't go into this, but this is how evaluation took place by the selection committee in terms of cost, in terms of grants, land, aero charges, taxes, etc., and how the final thing was selected. But the important thing is, which may be of interest to the university, is the kind of agreements that were negotiated. So we had no clue, Dr. Rajkumar, about all these agreements. We only had an agreement which was buying and selling between the government and whatever procurement was done earlier. But the consortium said, no, 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 you have to go through a gamut of agreements, beginning with state support agreement, shareholders agreement, joint venture and agreement, a land lease agreement, and finally, concession with the government of India. So we were nonplussed, and therefore we kind of reached out to the eminent legal fraternity whom you know of, and we said, please help us. And so one very eminent law firm in Mumbai said that, we will do it for you and you have to pay us 10 crores. And at that point in time, we were operating on a shoestring budget, so we couldn't go through that, very eminent law firm. And finally, Jyoti Sagar, J. Sagar Associates came forward, and Mr. Sagar himself appeared and said, I'll do it for you. Whatever you give it is okay for me. And the reason why he said he did it is because he thought that this will make a terrific impact on our country and it will be the forerunner of things. Of course, he was a shrewd businessman because following this, a lot of other projects also fell in his basket. So I'll not go into these agreements except to say that each of these agreements is very important in order to minimize risk for the JV partner. For instance, if you look at the concession agreement, the concession agreement says what are the terms under which the government of India parts with ownership to the private sector in order to have the private sector run the airport. What is the term of that agreement? It's 30 years, extendable for another 30 years, okay? And if you look at the state support agreement, I told you Siemens wanted $90 million from the state for providing the gap in equity financing, which we agreed. But we successfully negotiated with them and said, we will give it to you in the form of soft loan. You pay it back over X number of years and so on. And the joint venture agreement was, how are we going to run the airport between the private sector and the government? How are we going to minimize the heavy hand of the government? We kind of take a back seat. What are the things which the private sector partner can do and cannot do? Where are the minority rights for us as 26% equity holders? What if tomorrow Siemens runs away from the airport? What is the lock-in period? So we specified a lock-in period of 5 years. Namely, you have to run the airport for 5 years, and after that, you can sell it, as they have sold. And now we have the third owner of the airport, someone called Fairfax Holdings based in Canada. Siemens have exited, Zurich Airport has exited, and L&T have also exited by virtue of operation of the agreement. They have not done it on their own. And this kind of exit clause is also provided in other agreements. So the agreement characteristics are something that I already mentioned to you. See, it's very interesting, Dr. Rajkumar, that I was able to apply here, I meaning company, some of what I learned at the law school in Harvard. I took a fantastic course by someone called Roger Fisher, whom you might have known, who Getting to Yes is the name of the book. Strongly recommend to all students to read it. The Art of Principled Negotiations. And Roger Fisher taught that course with Bruce Patton across the entire winter break at the law school. And those outside of law school had to kind of qualify to get in, and I was one of the lucky people to make it after being on the reserve list. That was absolutely a mind-numbing course because he tells you how to negotiate under different circumstances. And I mention this because there were many occasions when,
That's a course you should offer.
okay, and unfortunately Roger Fisher is no longer alive. But what I wanted to say was, there were many occasions on which the Siemens expressed total disgust and wanted to leave. And it's very difficult to negotiate with the Germans. I'm sorry, please excuse me, because they're very, very driven by the language of the lawyers and words, whereas we are more, how do you describe it, conceptual.
Flexible.
Flexible. Flexible. So I had to persuade the government to be accommodating and to understand where they are coming from, what is their perception of risk, and how can we kind of create this partnership between them and us so that the project will see the light of the day. So, and the government of India in this was extremely indecisive, extremely halting. And one of the reasons was that we had a Congress government in the state and we had a BJP government at the center. I mean, I'm not making any allegations that the BJP government stymied the project, but maybe both the parties were the same. It would have mattered. Maybe, maybe not. But as a result, it was quite a painful task to negotiate these agreements, and they involved a lot of back and forth, and finally they saw the light of the day. I just also want to highlight that, it's not that government may have been a sleeping partner in the operation of the airport, but in terms of making the project happen, acquisition of land, making sure that water and other inputs were provided, keeping people away from the work site, benchmarking all the construction and equipment, that is the EPC contract, engineering, procurement, and construction, and finally using good offices with the government of India and getting it going. For instance, the government of India said where the airport is located today is very close to the Sri Lanka border. Yeah, and at that point in time, Sudarshan, there was this civil war in Sri Lanka between the Tamil Tigers and the government. So they said, there is going to be a problem of airspace allocation. And so they stopped this project, stopped the approval for 6 months. Yeah. So finally we went to Delhi, Narayan Murthy and I, and we met George Fernandes, an extraordinary person, George Fernandes. And George Fernandes also was from Bangalore, so he helped in getting clearance from the Defense Ministry for the project, not before we changed the alignment of the runway. So these are all the issues that come up in terms of a project to happen, and I'll end in 2 minutes. See, there are in the government, in the public domain, there are many stakeholders, unlike in the private space. So first of all, the main stakeholder here was Siemens itself, because they had to put the money and get the project going. So their emphasis was on minimization of risk, maximization of return, and autonomy. This was the first major project they were doing in India of that kind. So they can understand where they come from. The government of Karnataka was focused only on providing a good asset for the people, liberate them from that small airport in HAL. At the same time, make sure that they are not attacked on grounds of transparency, having a deal with the private guys, etc. Government of India, was vacillating a lot because they had to give up autonomy. The land losers, they gave up land easily in the first instance because 5 lakhs an acre was much more than what they had thought. But once land appreciation took place, even during the course of the project, they came back and said, we gave you land for a song. Now enhance our value, which you could not under law. So we requested Siemens to employ them in the airport and so on. So that discussion went on. The legislators were another group. Many of them opposed the project, and it was the chief minister's stewardship that got the project through. The public at large welcomed the project because for them, although the distance was a factor from central Bangalore to where the airport is, they got this brand new, fantastic asset, well operated, benchmarked to international standards, which was to their liking. So this project was started in 2005 and then we ended in 2008. At the time we started it, our estimate was that, we'll expand capacity from 3 million in the old airport to some 15 million in the new airport. Ladies and gentlemen, it's already at 45 million capacity with a new terminal which you have seen. The new terminal was not envisaged by us. Ours was only the first terminal. And now the Bangalore International Airport is among the fastest growing airports in South Asia. And this BIAL model has been replicated across all airports, beginning with Hyderabad and going to Delhi and Mumbai. So I'll end by saying, what are the lessons we have learned? First is, there must be an overwhelming advantage, public interest in doing a project like this in all public-private partnerships. So for instance, why the Golden Quadrilateral is so much appreciated is because, the ease of movement it has provided, the interconnection between north and south, west and east is something that is apparent. So that is one thing. The second is, there must be very firm intent and resolve on the part of the state government, as also the central government. So what happened in Karnataka was that S.M. Krishna's government ended in 2004, and a new government came into office, headed by somebody else, Dharam Singh, I think. And there was a concerted movement to kind of withdraw from the state support and so on. But his own party said, no, we will continue with the project, and therefore, they provided the state support, and that continuation was helpful to the project. Returns and risk I have already explained to you. And in order for public-private partnerships to have got going, obviously the role of the government is very important. And finally, in all these projects in our country, you have to manage different diverse stakeholders. How do you manage them? What do you provide to them is very important. So these are, my dear friends, are something that I wanted to pass on to you in the context of the public-private partnerships. And today, public-private partnerships are a very powerful way of expanding state capacity. I have details which says that now they have got into public-private partnerships in respect of water supply, in respect of health, rural development, almost I have case solid waste management in Coimbatore, post-harvest storage infrastructure in Madhya Pradesh, roads of course, ports in Maharashtra. So now this has really expanded, and that is the sure method in which state capacity has been augmented to improve India's infrastructure. And if you are talking of Vikshit Bharat 2047, the key determinant is going to be the quality of infrastructure, among other things. And therefore, India's infrastructure will have to be really world-class to reach an economy of $9 to $10 trillion. So thank you, Professor Rajkumar.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Mr. Jairaj, for that really amazing story and evolution of not just the project, but the ideas of public-private partnership. We have a panel about to begin. I just want to ask one question, in fact, two maybe. One is that how does the idea of, so when state is involved in projects, the dominant thought process is public interest and how it can serve public interest and even not for profit, and addressing how it can ensure the largest number of people are able to access it with the least amount of cost. And companies and corporations are inherently designed as for-profit institutions, and they are engaged in having the maximum benefit of shareholders, although those thought processes have been challenged more recently. So my first question is that how does this inherently opposing ideals and aspirations come together in advancing anything useful, valuable? And second is that is the state partnering with the company only because of the fact that there is lack of capital, or there are other reasons why this actually makes sense? In a way, my question to you is that if only governments have more money, should they even collaborate with a corporation? as opposed to just engaging corporations on as contractors to do stuff as opposed to PPP? Is there anything beyond the capital that the private company corporation brings to the table?
Question first, because I think that's very important. I think the main reason why public-private partnerships are preferred today, and from what I have seen, is because, there is a separation of ownership from management. Whereas when the state does it itself, it is very difficult for it to separate ownership from management. What you call professional management is not available in the state domain, including the IAS, because we are dilettantes. In fact, this Muralidharan study says that the average tenure of an IAS officer is 15 months. It is 15 months. So that is a partial answer to your question, as also the need for capital. This Bangalore project cost 2,500 crores. There is no way in 2000 of the government providing that money. But the other question is also very important about how do you reconcile the varied interests between the public and private. And if you just see, I have put it out there because you see, Siemens are very sharp people. When they committed to the project, they had done a survey by Lufthansa consultants. And Lufthansa consultants said that the average growth of traffic in Bangalore is going to be much more than 15% that we had thought of in the bid. It was going to be something like 30%. Because from the hinterland, if you have a world-class airport, people will come, as from Mysore, from Mangalore, from Kerala, from Andhra Pradesh, people will come in, It will be a magnet, and which is what it is today, including from Chennai. Because of timing and scheduling, people come. So they were sharp. They realized that with the kind of guarantees that are provided, there will be good returns. The one more condition that Siemens specified, which is now the norm in most airports, is that no other airport will open within 150 miles of Bangalore airport. So now that is being hotly debated in Delhi, because now with the dial here, there's one more airport opening up near Noida.
Jajjar, right?
Whatever that's called. That is
Yeah.
within 150 miles, right?
Yeah.
Something like that. So they have specified a set of conditions which had to be followed by the government. And for the government, it was a very big win. Of course, poor Mr. Krishna was not in office when the airport was opened. But, he is regarded rightly as the person who's got this going. Because if you visit Bangalore, you will see for yourself what a great asset it is.
Great. All right, may I invite Professor Naresh Singh to moderate the panel, Dr. Shivangi Chandal, Dr. Sunitra Kathak, and Dr. Krishna.
I hope I've answered you.
Yeah, absolutely. Dr. Krishnanu Karmakar. We have completed the session on time, but we have only half an hour for your panel. Thanks.
All right. Thank you very much, both Vice Chancellor and Mr. Jairam. Jairaj, sorry. So the way we'll do this, because we only have a very short time, we will. I'll just pose one or two points on my own mind, and then ask my panelists to highlight one or two issues from their perspective for your reaction. Unfortunately, we might not have time to engage the audience, our students, and so on. My first point is, going beyond this specific case study, is the issue of corruption in PPPs. You might recall in 2013, a UN report on PPPs in India highlighted rampant corruption in PPPs, especially due to erosion of revenue share. That was a big issue. So I'd like you to comment on that as one question. Is it still high? Is it ongoing or not? And what's the issue there? The second point I'd flag is the issue of state capacity, which you expressed your deep interest in at the outset of your talk as well. As you know, and you were at Harvard, you might recall Robert Rothberg, who was active in governance at that time. And Robert and his colleague, Boardman, I think, offered a definition similar to the one you have used, mission-oriented, outputs-oriented. So they've defined the governance efficiency of a government as its ability to get things done, put it that way. Fukuyama, on the other hand, has a very different approach to government capacity, and he defines it as the nature of the government, that is the separation of the bureaucracy from the political directorate, so the independence of the bureaucracy and their efficiency of process within the bureaucracy, or a public administration perspective, if you like. When you look at the reviews of these two kind of approaches, most people in governance come down on the side of Fukuyama. Mission-oriented is good for things like projects, but it is not that good for governance of a society where you have a lot of other issues, social inclusion, and leaving no one behind and so on. So I'd like you to comment on that, because I worry about Viksit Bharat, not just being measured in terms of delivery of infrastructure products and GDP per capita growth and so on, and us ending up with a society of 300 million people still living in poverty, which is quite possible, contradictory. So I'd like you to react to that, maybe before we turn to the panelists briefly, and then we can come to my panelists. Thank you.
No, those are very perceptive issues. I have no answer or defense on the issue of corruption. I'm not speaking on behalf of the government and all that. How we proved corruption from the BIAL is what I have shown you, by transparent selection, by making sure that all the stakeholders had a chance to discuss it, by bringing it forward before the cabinet, by having a public debate on it, by ensuring that every aspect of the airport project was transparent and open to the public view, only because the chief minister of the day had this forward-looking, development-oriented mindset. I have no guarantee that this kind of an attitude is followed in other public-private projects. But generally, Professor, I'll say this, that compared to the projects that were run only by the government, and I am familiar with the road projects in our state where the government put huge amount of money and the projects turned out to be second rate. Public-private partnerships in the road sector have also proved to be far better, far superior, and citizen-oriented with conveniences, etc., compared to what government did alone. I don't know about what you said as the erosion of revenue. I'm not familiar with that term. But overall, I think, for instance, even in the ports, I'm familiar with some ports where there's public-private partnership. Capacity has increased. The turnaround time for the ships have come down. And it seems to me that public interest has been met through public-private partnership. Now, the state capacity is very important because the Vice Chancellor had strictly instructed me about time. I didn't go through what Muralidharan has said about why, according to him, state capacity is weak. And it is exactly for the reasons that you mentioned, that while this mission mode work is done like that, ordinary tasks of government are not performed well. For instance, he speaks about enrollment in rural education. Apparently, why apparently, in the states in India, there's hardly 40% enrollment in primary schools. And if you put the students to test, they are unable to pass even minimum educational attainment. And one of the reasons for it, I have seen it in Karnataka, is because of the high degree of absenteeism among the school teachers in the rural areas, although, by the way, they are well paid, because of poor supervision at the top. So he says that instead of, recruiting more teachers, you improve the supervision at the top, then educational attainment will increase. Another thing he says is that, one of the things in India is in the context of federal economic relations, the extent of decentralization that has taken place in India at the lowest level, that is the panchayat level and below, is only 1.5% of total resources. Whereas in China, it is 51%, right? So things like that. And I mentioned that one of his prescriptions is that, we must manage the workforce and government better. He says that there are only 15 employees in India, state and central sector, 15 employees per 10,000 people. Whereas the norm in developed countries is 51 per 10,000 people. And I also mentioned about the tenure that IAS officers have, 1.5 years or so, 15 months. So these are really the issues that bear on poor capacity. And this is endemic even today. Nothing has changed, at least in the state. I don't know about the central government. Maybe things have changed for the better. But that's what it is.
Naresh, I just want to add that I'm sure you saw this report. I think it was July 2023, the Global Multidimensional Poverty Index report
Annual.
by both Oxford University, UNDP. They have said that 415 million people in India were removed out of poverty in 15 years from 2005 to 2019. So in 15 years, 415 million people have been removed out of poverty, it's UN report. So in a way, it will be very difficult to argue that you cannot achieve that type of stupendous success if you focus on some key aspects of development which can ultimately reduce and eliminate. I mean, I was actually surprised by the data. 15 years, 415 million people, that's
Well,
a
the
good
figures
number.
I have seen is 250 million, but that might be in a shorter period. And one has to go into how these people got out of poverty. A lot of it is entrepreneurship.
Oh, sure, of course, we can definitely, but my point is that if within a short
No,
span of
I hear you.
15 years, so many people can be removed out of poverty, is an important indicator how we can, this report actually was not welcomed by the government of India, but the fact is, it's a pretty good data.
No, it is a phenomenal achievement and reminds us of the China achievement in the late 90s. Huh?
Yes,
That
but
they
in
lifted
a much
400
more different,
in a
in a
very different
democratic
context.
form of government,
Yeah,
it's far more difficult to get things done.
Absolutely. So what I suggest now in view of our time constraints is that we have 2-3 minutes reactions from the panelists. And if you don't mind, I let them just give all their questions and then you react.
Of course.
So we'll go in the order of the program. First, we will go with Shivangi and then Sunitra and then Krishna.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Jairaj, for this wonderful presentation. I mean, it brought back a lot of things that I have read upon, and contrary to a lot of challenges that we have heard that PPP entails in terms of what the theory tells us. Now, the success model of Bangalore Airport did remind me of what Oliver Hart has recently written in one of his papers. Now, he's the guy who won Nobel Prize in 2016 for his work on contract design. And his work on incomplete contracts is what has pioneered this PPP model. So one of his recent papers, although he's the second author, the first author, I'm forgetting the name, is the primary source in this, talks about what is called as moving away from traditional incomplete contracts to more like relational contracts, which is what we actually see behind the success of Bangalore Airport or the success story, because relational contracts are actually built on incorporate what you call as guiding principles on the chance of some contingency. Or so these are broadly contingent contracts, but they are able to guide like negotiations in the sense when both parties are just moving away from the table and being very stubborn, then these set of rules which are mostly defined on the values of the state, in the sense of what are the norms of the country, what are the, like, you would want to practice fairness, you would want to practice public integrity. So on these norms you build up some of the guiding principles, and then on the basis of that you allow the negotiations. And he has shown that this kind of contracting to some extent has reinforced these tendencies to play fair, the tendencies to not break out of PPP models. And though that's something which story or your discussion on negotiations in Bangalore during the tenure of the construction, the build, operate, and transfer procedure did remind me of that. I would also like to talk about like why PPP, because in the sense that what I have understood is that, see, we have been using traditional forms of procurement in the sense that we have been contracting out tasks to private players. So where public-private partnership is interesting is that it, instead of a scenario where we are contracting a firm for construction and then operation, we are contracting one firm, we are bundling these two tasks into one, and we are contracting it out. So as such, the person who is operating the airport has incentives to invest in cost reducing activities, so that its operation of the airport is not very costly. So that's the traditional theory that we have been running with. But there are some issues with that in the sense that future is uncertain, which is why your contracts are incomplete. So when they're incomplete, there is scope for tapping into funds from the government, which is I think I've correctly understood them as viability gap funding. So there are now massive reports in PPP projects about where firms are now over tapping into this viability gap funding, which is what I think in the recent article, the Metro Man, Professor Sridharan has also pointed out that, you know, the risk with PPP model is that all these projects will be expensive. Inherently, like on an average, will be expensive for the government, which is what is building on Professor Naresh's point, that there is a erosion in revenue. So, erosion in revenue. That's what Professor Naresh said. So I think that's what I think is what our concern with PPP, one of the concerns with PPP is. Another thing is with respect to your bid procedure, which I was very interested in. Now, recently with like I said, these guiding principles are helpful. So for procurement, the government now has guidelines. These are general financial rules, the GFR 2017. They talk about procurement in public works. So the General Financial Rules 2017 do have guidelines to use quality cum cost selection method, which is QCBS, instead of having a different or a L1 kind of a process. So I was just wondering, what are your thoughts on that in terms of, you know, implementing QCBS? I'll respond to that. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
More questions, yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for your beautiful presentation and especially letting us know the success story, because mostly my dealing with the literature with infrastructure project and how they are impacting economic activity. I have seen different kind of infrastructure projects. Those are not giving the expected outcomes because of delay in completion. Like my research on international trade and with the corridors, how those are impactful in terms of economic activity. So related to your presentation, what I want to know more about that when it is infrastructure related to airports, so mostly we are covering the urban economy and the kind of economy that you talked about. What would be the kind of inclusion in terms of rural economy and the rural people? Because airport kind of example that you have presented and gave us a kind of success story, it's basically related to urban economy and urban kind of connectivity and all this kind of economic activity. But what about the rural people? Because especially I think our focus is to achieve by 2047, the RBI estimate it's talking about a kind of real GDP at per compound growth rate 9%, and where inclusion of all citizens would be there. So how would this PPP model can be like useful for the rural economy? It could be like anyway, like how you are thinking of doing different infrastructure projects, getting a kind of partnership between public and private, of course. And secondly, you talked about state capacity, which is obvious because the base of your PPP model, also the theoretical background we all are having, is addressing the market failure. So definitely the kind of collaboration that you talked about, private and public, would benefiting, like in terms of efficiency generation, but how this kind of state capacity, based on that you presented your model, would not be a kind of hurdle for every state if the central state relationship is not as per the expectation. Like if your basic model is based on the state capacity, how would you be able to generalize this model for India as a whole, where central government and state government, the relationship is not probably the same or as per expectation? Whether this is the kind of problem we are facing, the failure of many PPP model that has been observed, that the kind of interest is not same, like the state interest and the government interest in that way I'm talking. And of course, I want to know further that, of course, the lesson you already discussed that we can take forward for other kind of model, but already the failure, the kind of PPP model we have faced, how to rectify that? Whether it is because of less transparency or kind of bidding procedure you have followed for the airport thing was not there. So is there any alternative, like the plan B, to rectify the failure or maybe the incompleteness that has not been done at proper rate? Is there any solution to rectify those kind of failure? So that's all. Thank you.
You'll agree that a lot of rural people use planes, with the kind of reduction in airfares. I mean, Indigo fares can be 1,500, 2,000, 3,000. So planes are not just for the urban people. So.
Thank you, Mr. Jairaj, for your quite illuminating talk. Now, since we have many students here, I just want to mention that the way I look at PPP, it is like to borrow from a recent very popular fantasy series on Amazon Prime. It's like the turning of the wheel, because in the 19th and early 20th century, infrastructure projects used to be mostly financed by private equity. Then came our traditional Weberian public administration model, where government got involved from around 1940s till 1980s for financing all public infrastructures, which we gradually started thinking that that is the way of financing public infrastructure. But then in public management came this new thought of new public management, where the idea of bringing in efficiency and the management principles prevalent in the private sector should be brought to get more efficiency, more competition in the public sector's activities, and therefore this contractual state was created everywhere, starting mostly with the UK, where the Public Finance Initiative started this entire revolution of PPP. Now, related to that, the couple of questions that I have, the first thing is, in Australia, for example, we have seen that PPPs have not really been successful, for example, for health sector. So in relation to that, my question to you is, do you think all sectors are ready for PPP, or do you think there are certain sectors where PPPs are likely to be more successful compared to some other sectors? And there is another thing, which is that it is not just about bringing in the efficiency gains that are there and innovations that are available in the private sector, but also about sharing of risks, which you also mentioned towards the beginning part of your talk. Now, just as a clarification to our students, can you shed a little bit more light? What type of risks rests with the private partner, and what type of risks goes to the public partner in case of PPP? And the third question is a little bit more related to this Bengaluru project. You said that the government had to give this $80 million US soft loan to the consortium. Now, my question is, since already there was the idea of PPP is that the governments are constrained from the point of view of budget, therefore this entire PPP model became popular. So my question is that how did government finance this loan really? So just as a very specific question. But in general, I have the other two questions: risk sharing and which sectors are more suitable compared to other sectors. Thank you.
So, Mr.
Before I invite him, I just want to ask, if there's any students who have a question, then you can collectively answer, please.
The Vice Chancellor. No, because I can speak at length, but he is looking at his watch, so therefore brevity is the soul of wit. Okay, so I will try to be quick and brief. Uh, Sunetra, right? Shivani, sorry. Uh, I really liked your question, madam, about this incomplete contracts, okay? And I think the way we overcame them.
Relational contracts.
Yeah, incomplete contracts and relational contracts. The way we overcame them was really to, when these agreements were negotiated, the main issue that Siemens posed were the following, and I'll be very open. One was moral hazards, right? How do we know that, we will not get stuck in relationships with the government for obvious reasons? Secondly, about returns. Today you have this government saying this. How do you know they'll not renege on it? Now, in this, I found that the presence of Mr. Narayan Murthy as chairman of BIAL was a terrific antidote to all these issues that were raised by the consortium. Because, if you know who he is, he's a man of the highest integrity and capacity. And he said something that had more than the value of what the government would say. That was a very important thing. And secondly, all these bids and all these agreements were negotiated to the hilt. Their company was Linkletters, law firm in the UK, and ours was Sagar. So there was no ambiguity at all in the agreements. And as I said, these agreements were replicated in the case of other airports. And also to answer your question, today, these bid documents are all standard, okay? And for that, today we must remember Montek Singh Ahluwalia, who was Deputy Chairman of the Planning Commission, and a senior colleague of mine who is no more, you probably know him, Sudarshan, Gajendra Haldia, who was handling PPPs in the then Planning Commission. And together they created a set of documents which today have stood the test of time and which answer a lot of the contractual issues that you have posed as also that you have raised. Now, and Professor Sunetra, you asked about the rural areas. So I have a snapshot of studies, you can't read it, where in the context of rural areas, if you see the item number 5, development of grain silo in Ujjain, okay, that is a rural project under the public-private partnership. And basically, it's a very important sector of the Indian economy relating to post-harvest storage. And this Madhya Pradesh pioneered it. And today it is the pattern in Maharashtra and Uttar Pradesh and other states. So some of these areas of working are amenable to PPP and some others are not. For instance, education, rural education has not been amenable to public-private partnership because of the advent of private schools in rural areas. And these private schools cunningly disguise themselves as convent schools, Sudarshan. They call themselves Saint Patrick or something of that kind, and they charge very high fees, and gullible people send their kids to those schools. So therefore, there is a problem about what kind of projects really work in which sector. And I'm not making an argument that PPPs are the answer to state capacity, period. No. I'm saying only in the context of infrastructure, where there's bulky projects, where gestation periods have been high, where it is impossible for government to provide the kind of capital, and where management by government also leaves a lot to be desired. And I agree with your issue about commission and omission. But I don't know how IAS officers can be penalized for for omission. I know what happens in commission. There is this Prevention of Corruption Act, which I'm sure you may be familiar with. But how do you penalize them when omission, where, it's a virtue in government to say no, as it stands, because, and it helps also, it's a defense in certain matters. So I don't have an answer about commission and omission. And about how corruption in PPPs can be plugged, I don't have an answer for that. I don't even know about PPPs being unsuccessful in Australia. Sir, you raised that issue. And I only say that in the context where major infrastructure projects have been evident, PPP has succeeded. That's the limited point I'm making. About risks, you also raised a question of risks. What kind of risks go to the public and private players in PPP? The main risk that the private people have to contend with, from what I understood, is the risk of management failure. Supposing, for some reason, their operation of the airport is poor, or there is a force majeure, some earthquake takes place or something, then, they're really put into a very bad shape. But the public risks, the risks that the government faces in this is loss of ownership. Loss of ownership, loss of management, because the way the governments work, is that they have an insatiable appetite to control. That is in the logic. In any government, not only the government that I work with, any government, they may profess to say least governance is good governance and all that. But at the end of the day, the fact is, government, qua government, wants to control. I'm talking of the IAS only. I'm not talking of anybody else, because that's all I know. So in that context, risk for the government is this issue of giving up ownership. The state support you asked, it was in the bid document that you can bid and ask for state support. And as I pointed out, the bidder who gave lesser state support. In the case of Siemens, 90. In the case of Octave, 120 or 130. The selection committee preferred Siemens. And by the way, this was incorporated in the budget. The state, process the budget every year, right? So which is why I said when the successor government came, there was some talk that, the guys may go back on it, but fortunately, wiser counsel prevailed and they went through the project. That's
Mr. Goodwinter, you want to say something?
Very, very quickly. Your discussion brought back 4 years of déjà vu for me. When I was ambassador of my country, I was involved with a project in India. I would say a very good project, supported by all the political sources and so forth. And by the way, I was a civil engineer. My first job was with Hochtief.
Octave.
Of all
I'm
things.
sorry that they lost the.
But
I feel bad for you.
so I would write about this, and I would call it getting to know, not getting to yes, because we went through all the stages that you mentioned, and one of the bottom lines, there's 4 or 5 bottom lines, I'll only deal with one of them, that I approached a very important industrialist in this country and showed him the project, and then he came back, he discussed it with his colleagues, like he came back and discussed it with me. He says, this will not work. I said, what do you mean? We have this contract, very good contract, the return is guaranteed. He says, look, the government will change. They will say that we're paying too much and that we will not pay you what said in the contract. And I said, yeah, but we'll go to court. Yes, you'll go to court. 40 years later, you might get a result. So I'm answering both of these 2 questions here. That project is still on the works on a smaller scale. Maybe it will succeed eventually. So I won't write about it until the final nail is in the coffin.
Professor Goodwinter, I noticed that Dr. Geeta Sinha is supposed to do something, and we have not yet done that. So, Geeta, you want to do the closing, and then I will present a memento.
Kaveri is supposed to do.
Please go ahead.
Kaveri.
She will do it on my behalf.
No, that's. All right. I actually don't have much to say other than remember some of my younger days in Bangalore when every other day we would open the newspaper and there would be something written either about you or Mr. Madiyal and the kind of achievements that you were having. I still remember perhaps the BMTC project was one of the first where you cleared up all the bus stops and eased the urban transportation, which we desperately needed in Bangalore in those days. And I used to travel by bus. So when that came out in the newspaper, I was like, okay, this is a man I have to thank. And it so happened that I realized that a junior of mine was your daughter, later on, that this is actually Tanya's father. But I think something needs to be said about, bureaucrats who are extremely efficient, ethical, moral, principled, and who are able to carry through these projects so successfully and make it seem so easy that other people then take it for granted and then get into trouble, as some of us have been talking about. So we are very lucky to have you, Mr. Jairaj, today with us, and we are very lucky that you have decided to become a part of our public policy school. And I think this is the first step, and we need more people like you coming in from the government to tell our students about real experiences, real case studies, and real life, that we should not be limited only to academia and books and studies and research, that we should have people on hands like you. And I'm very, very...
I haven't told you the seamy side of life.
Okay.
Some other time.
So that we'll talk about later.
The only amendment to what you said I will do is that we are having him not just within the public policy school, but across the university. Yeah. He is going to do more than just.
Yeah, we need more applied, more on-hands people like you, and very successful bureaucrats like you, more people like you. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation and for this wonderful talk. We learned a lot. Thank you.